the Jenny Wilson Elementary School leading the pledge tonight. Welcome.
Gavin.
You're the right way.
We have Gavin and Gavin together, and then face flat over there. Hands over your hearts.
All right. We're going to take our picture with you guys. Would that be okay? Yep.
Okay, so front row, you'll just turn around and face the back row. And then back row, you follow me.
You're good. I don't know how to say that pledge. Nice and loud. Squeeze in there, we have to squeeze in.
Squeeze in. We need to make a third row.
All right, we'll be there.
No, you're in the middle right there.
Okay, good.
Come on.
No, you're good. Right in the middle.
All right, you guys ready? Right here. 1, 2.
Look at Miss Cessna. Look, Miss Newton.
Okay, wait right here. Around and shake our.
Just a little bit, and then any brothers.
Shake your hand.
This way.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Keep going, keep going.
Gavin,
All the way down, yeah, all the way down, sweetheart. Shake. Over here. If you want to stay for a presentation, you can. If you want to leave, that's okay too. We're going to present some things on Jenny Wilson right now. So you can stay for that, or you okay, you guys can all go that way. Yeah, yep, you can go with your family, you bet.
Is that recording or is that recording?
And willing, you can go on ahead and leave now and take them on. our bank, some of our kids at the bank, and they won, and I'll pass this down to you so you can see their little picture, but they won the
Okay, well, they did a good job of explaining the law, the gates, 3, 5, 7 days, things like that. And, the letters and some of the parent contact. I'll explain to you a little bit about how we approach it at the high school as far as unverified, unexcused absences, and truancy. Once a student hits that 3, we haven't really crossed the threshold of anyone requiring even a contract yet. And we've done a really good job, especially, I will say, in the freshman academy, of making the parent contact and cleaning up attendance before they become bigger issues. School of Public Service, here we are historically, as far as number of kids who would qualify in the legal definition of truant over time. This year so far, as of, I think the numbers were run for me last Monday, there are 18 students that would meet that definition. However, there are also 14 students that are 18 plus, that are past the age where we would file an affidavit. So we try to deal with them using these other methods of, you're 18, you're gonna graduate, the finish line is there, let's get to school. We try to use a different carrot with them and their families. You've invested 12 years of education since kindergarten, you're not gonna stop now. And so we try to take a different tack with them. A lot of these kids, we will graduate at semester time, 132, I wish Kaylee was still here, she'd be able to tell me the counselor's number. Historically, 125 to 150 students. And a lot of these kids right now that are 18 plus are in that. They've got less than 3 weeks left of school now before they graduate that semester. Arts and communications, here they are historically. Currently 24 that meet the legal definition, 10 of which, there are in addition 10 students that would meet the legal definition, but they're over 18.
So it's 24 plus 23.
Yeah, well, yeah.
24 plus 10.
Yes. Trade and health, there are currently 53 that meet the 3, 5, or 7 day criteria. but also 23, they have 23 students in the academy that would meet the criteria but are 18 plus. So far this year, freshmen, as I said, they've done a great job of meeting with parents. They haven't even had to go to the contract part of our dealings with families yet. Public service, Dr. Kipp, he has got 13 that are either targeted for a contract, has a contract in place, or have had parent meetings. So we've had a lot of parent meetings. They get there in September, they get there in October, and November is about the time when we start having these kids hit the 3, 5, and 7-day threshold. So we're having a lot of parent meetings. There are 2 students that we have identified as the interventions aren't working, we're going to have to file an affidavit. So they are in the process of working through. We've gone past the principal meeting, we've gone past the need for a diversion contract or the contract, and they've broken the contract, so we've identified 2 students there that are beyond that we will have to file on. Arts and Comm, 14 parent meetings and contracts have been established so far, with 1 student who has passed the threshold. And then in trade and health, they're 17 and 8. As they said, for the middle school, elementary school, because of diversion contracts, because of parent meetings, the numbers of affidavits that we've had to file in historic years have been low, 20, in the 20s. And so that's where we're at so far with 11 kids, as I just labeled there, as identified as you have, interventions haven't helped, we're gonna have to file on you. And so we're in the process on 11 students right now that haven't responded to the first letter, haven't responded to a parent meeting, haven't responded to a contract. And so now, like I said, we've had to identify that at least halfway through the year, which is close to being about the same. Years. So those haven't all been filed, but they've been targeted as you haven't met your part of the bargain, so we will have to have those. And as she said pretty well, these numbers fluctuate because sometimes when a student hits 3, 5, or 7 and we call home, we end up correcting a lot of attendance once we get a hold of the family or they get that first letter and they call and they say, oh, no, we were here and I've got the doctor's note or I've got the court paper that says that we were in Wichita and we had to go to a hearing, and then we correct that attendance. So the number may go up and then we make the phone calls, the parents come in and then the numbers go back down. So it's all trying to partner up with the parents and the kids so they can get there. So that's where we are with our process and where we are kind of historically.
I had a question. I just wondered if between the different levels, high school, middle school, and the lower grades, if you identified any families that you need to work with because their siblings that are all not coming.
Yeah. When we get to that level, oftentimes they'll say, hey, yeah, we've been working with this family for 2 years. We've been working with this family so there's communication back and forth. We kind of get the heads up and that we do see commonalities. Yeah, there's a brother here at the high school, there's a sister at the middle school, and we're both dealing with that. So yeah, that's kind of the only way this really works is that there is some communication back there because it can't be transferring from one level to another being a get out of jail free card. So yeah. Good question.
She asked it.
So do we track any other kind of data once these students get on this list of truancy? Like, do we try and find out, are these students, do they have jobs? Are they maybe homeless? Are they involved in activities? I'm just curious to see if we see trends or...
We don't track the data, but I will tell you anecdotally, they are not involved in activities because, as she said, the coaches and the sponsors keep on them, and if they're not there, they want to know why you're not there. And probably the only data that we really track on some of these is we try to keep good tabs on their grades to make sure that that's part of their truancy contract, is that they're going to check in with their academy and they're gonna check in with their truancy officer, and that they agree that they are going to work on their grades. So no, we don't historically track that data.
I just wonder if, somewhat like we do with individual plans of studies, if it's not necessary to do individual plan of attack when we see
Yeah.
students with certain needs. I mean,
Yeah, and that's where, honestly, with the parent meeting and diversion contract, we really do take it on almost a case-by-case basis. You know, what's causing the issue? There were, for instance, I know there was a family that we found earlier this year, the student was always missing first hour. Well, we find out that it's a transportation issue. It's a transportation getting a sibling, sometimes they're responsible for getting the sibling to school. Well, the elementary start a little later than the high school, and so it's really hard for them and the family. It was hard for them to make it work for a couple of weeks. Well, we didn't know that until we individually call them in and say, well, what's the deal? And then we find that out. And then we try to, try to make arrangements or do what we can working. Sometimes we've worked with elementary school principals. Say, hey, can this kid come in a little bit earlier than normally? You'd normally open their door because their sibling has got to drop them off before they go to the high school. And so trying to do it case by case.
anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I did want to ask on
Yep.
these, you guys said Forest Good is off on this, so what's the numbers that,
We don't, we're working the, they coded things wrong in the system in a way, these numbers are recorded state. We upload a report at the end of every school year in June. And so the data for the past years is not gonna be able to be corrected. But for this year, I think the numbers that they shared with you were probably reasonably accurate. And it'll be more accurate when we update the system this year, because again, chronic absenteeism deals with absences that are excused, unexcused, or suspensions. But if they're at a school activity, they're not counted absent. And so in how those things were coded for Horace Good, they didn't code the same way, the proper way that the high school and KH did. So Horace Good will be higher, probably than both, but it won't be 40 like is indicated on here. It'll probably be more in the 20 to 25 range when we get it sorted out. And I might just comment a little bit on this. So the board asked for a report on attendance and truancy, and so truancy deals with unexcused absences. Chronic absenteeism, as you learned tonight, deals with any kind of absences. One of the things that we've looked at in schools for a long time is attendance rate. So that is what percentage of kids are in attendance on average every day. And so 95% is a pretty good benchmark. And so you'll notice that most of our schools are at that 95%. As you get older, as the students get older, it's normal for that attendance rate to go down a little bit. The high school, the last 2 years has been approaching 94.
93.9.
Yeah. 5 years ago, they were at around 91 or 92. So they're kind of on the right track. KH's numbers are pretty good, and Horace Good probably has a little room to improve there. So, but there's a lot of different ways to look at attendance. And we've given you kind of three: general attendance rate, chronic absenteeism, and then truancy. So, and obviously we could improve in every one of those, and we would like to, because kids learn more when they're there. So.
I appreciate the fact that you guys are having those meetings, because I remember when I was at the county attorney's office, we had an intake form that included why is your kid missing school? Because we had no idea. Was it a transportation issue? Was mom or dad pulling the child to go and translate for a doctor's appointment, or going to the bank, or going to the grocery store to help the parent out with a language barrier? And so we're trying to figure those things out so we could point them to the right resources. So having that step accomplished, because really the court is not the place to be trying to figure that out. So it's very helpful that you're having that contact with them.
And he asked about the letters being in the native language. Actual, yes, the letter is only in Spanish and English, but when you're having that parent meeting, Dr. Kip, how many different languages have you had to have parent meetings translated in about different things? I mean,
Other than English, 3.
yeah, so, that's when you can do that face-to-face kind of communication, bring a translator and have Albert or someone else come in and translate those things before it, in addition to the legal document, they get a chance to have those face-to-face and have them translated, so.
All right, I don't want to date you on this, but I would say probably 10 years or so ago, our number of cases in the county attorney's office was in the hundreds. I would say that's fair to say that. So it was a big burden on the court system, it was a big burden on the county attorney's office, and really credit the people in the county attorney's office, Steve's folks, all of our truancy folks who have really figured out better ways to address this. And so we think we can even improve it even more than what we're doing now.
Okay, thanks again. All right, we'll move on to the technology report.
Good evening. I'm Roxy Schaefer, Director of Technology.
Oh, Casey Fleiss, Instructional Technology Coordinator. Good to see everybody again.
We are presenting this evening on behalf of the Technology Steering Committee. Our directive from you last year, as we understood it, was to look at the one-to-one implementation at the high school. I think there was some discussion on the board of, do we have the correct device? How are we doing in that implementation with that tech plan? So we spent last spring and a little bit this fall looking at that. I had the opportunity to go to a Future Ready Schools conference, and the tech side of that conference was really pretty good. But the big thing that my takeaway was, our goal here is to make technology invisible. They likened it like to the desk, to the air conditioning, something that you don't even think about when you go into the classroom. That's really our goal. When you see a printer, you see a chair, it should be the same thing, not how is it being used, what is it? It's a tool, it's part of the everyday classroom. So that's kind of our goal with this. Okay, so we had our tech steering committee, and we have a few out in the public here. We added quite a few people to that specifically from the high school, since that's what we were looking at. So we had several teachers, and here's your listing, and you'll see Mark Rude and Shannon Oakley kind of in the corner, not because they're naughty, but because Shannon was on our committee last year, and she is no longer employed here. I think she moved out of town, and then Mark Rude joined us this year. So they weren't there or she was there last year, and Mark is now in her slot this year. Okay, so the tech steering committee, we met 3 times last spring and once this fall. We discussed the aspects of the current learning initiative and considerations of other devices, and we talked a considerable amount of time on pilots. We developed surveys for teachers, students, and parents and gave those. We discussed other devices, survey outcomes, cost of ownership for all the programs, and then we finalized a recommendation for you.
So the rest of the presentation is kind of broken down by each meeting, kind of the goals and objectives for each meeting that we went through. So the first one was in February, when we got the team together to discuss the direction that you put before us, that Roxy talked about, to talk about making decisions on who we should survey and going through that process as well. And then just again, looking at what our current status was at this point. When we did that, one thing that we kind of brought back to the committee, many of them were not here when we originally proposed this to you guys, and was approved by the high school, or for the high school to be a one-to-one. The original goals of the program are there on the left. Again, a lot of things that we still talk about: personalized learning, increased engagement, closing that digital divide, letting all of our kids have equal access to the devices, so we don't have that haves and have-nots kind of around our community. immediate teacher feedback, digital citizenship, on and on and on. You kind of see those goals there. And what we wanted to kind of point to this slide is on the right are things that we're currently doing today with our staff development and with what we're kind of teaching our teachers and preaching to our admin. Are those 4 key areas this year are deep engagement, strong instruction, grade appropriate assignments, and high expectations. And kind of the whole point was here to just kind of draw your attention. Those are still, all those things that we set years ago for the one-to-one at the high school still hold true today. Those are still the same things we're trying to attain through this program, and still trying to make sure that the device and instruction, the professional development, all the things that we're doing point us into those directions where kids are meeting those expectations and having an opportunity to see that. One thing we did share with the committee back at that point in February, this is just a chart of all the app usage in our carts, which would be our K, at this point was K-8, all had carts in their buildings, and then it did include our one-to-one iPads, which would have been at that point 4th grade, 5th grade, and this did actually include our high school freshmen because they were in the managed store last year as a pilot at the high school to put those kids under management. So these are apps that we were managing, just a breakdown so you can kind of see how apps were distributed. The big takeaway for the committee wasn't that it's just ELA apps and math apps. It's a wide spectrum of all the content areas that are really trying to use the apps, really trying to use the devices to improve instruction, to make things a little bit better for their kids, whether it's personalization, find the right app for that kid that may be struggling, maybe in a special education situation, ESL situation, kids who are struggling to learn to read that's not on grade level, all kinds of activities that are going on that are represented here. I think when we did this was almost 400 apps at that time that we were managing and helping schools have on their carts. And so this just gave you kind of a brief breakdown for our committee so they kind of knew what was going on currently in our schools. And we'll talk about the high school currently now, because now they're all in a managed state here in a little bit.
So this is K-9.
This would be K-9, correct, yep,
Thank you.
in February at that time. So then the next meeting was on 3/19.
All right, so on 3/19, we discussed creation of the parent, student, and teacher surveys, coming up with the questions that we wanted to ask those. And then we talked quite a bit about the different devices, if we were to run a pilot, what those would look like. So we came up with 14 questions for the teacher survey, and we did that survey in the spring of last year and the fall of this year. And then we came up with 9 questions for the parent survey. We asked those to be taken at the parent-teacher conferences last spring. And then 11 questions for our students, and we took those again last spring, and then again in the fall this year. So we asked those to take during mentoring. We talked quite a bit about piloting. So I think listening to the discussion here, the Chromebook is the hot topic of item, or hot item that you guys talked about. So we looked specifically at the Chromebook. We have no need to pilot a laptop because we have laptops. We know how they react, we know how they work with our systems, we know how to run them, how to image them, but Chromebooks are unknown to us, so we did a lot of research on those. We talked about a pilot in 5 content areas at the high school, being ELA, science, sped, math, and social studies. The only device they would use in those classrooms would be a Chromebook. No iPads would be used at all. That was the discussion. And then we chose an HP X360 that was just a model that we picked because it had a front rear-facing camera. In discussions with the committee, lots of talks about what we like and dislike about the iPad. And what came out, kind of the non-negotiables that I recall were, we like the rear-facing camera because students, as I'm sure these little Jenny Wilson kids that you showed earlier, were using the iPad to video their whatever talk, I forget what she called it.
Cooper Chat.
Cooper Chat. And then touchscreen. Lots of talk about the touchscreen. Math is all on Shobi for a lot of grades, maybe not specifically the high school, but the conversation about writing the math programs on the iPad, not having the need for as much paper. So we selected an HP 360. So we looked at the cost of that. So 150, we estimated Chromebooks at 335. We would need some charging carts because they wouldn't go home. We would need some type of case. We would have to get a management system, because the current management system that we use for all our iPads is specific to iPads, so we'd have to have another management system. And then we would have to get trained. Our people would need to get trained, and then we'd have to train the teachers as well. So the estimated cost to run the pilot was $64,000. So the committee then talked a lot about, should we spend $64,000 to pilot that? We decided then to do the surveys and let us get the feedback from the students, the teachers, and parents, and to see then, what are their thoughts?
So at this extraordinary meeting, we gathered up all the data from the surveys, and we pinpointed really 3 key elements that we needed to address. We needed more staff development for our high school teachers. We got a lot of feedback from teachers that students need keyboards. And there was a real distraction with the games, with the students were playing. So as a committee, we got together and we decided, how can we help these teachers lessen the problems and help them with what we needed to improve on. So we went into discussion of the cost, diminishing the distractions, and providing keyboards. This is the survey data, and we did share all the survey data that we received with you, and I think it was 100 and how many pages?
Well, just the teacher one was 105 pages.
So we included every comment that was made so that you could see those. But here's the big takeaway based on what we identified. This was the first one under the teacher. This is in the spring. And the question is the iPad the appropriate device for our one-to-one program? Because that was what you had tasked us with. And in the spring, the teachers said, 59% said yes, it was the appropriate device, and 41% said no, it's not. In the fall, not much change. It just went up a little bit, 61 to 39. The students in the spring of last school year said yes, 87% said it is the right device, 13% said no. Went up a little bit in the fall of this year. 90% of the students said it's the right device, 10 said no. And this is, interestingly enough, this is after we even locked down all the kids' iPads where they could not just download any app anymore. And it actually went up. They still said, yes, it's the right device. We only surveyed the parents one time, and that was at spring parent-teacher conferences. The parents said 86% said, yes, it's the right device. 14% said no. So if you look at all teacher combined, it was 60-40 for the teachers, that the iPad was the right device, and 89-11 for the students. But all stakeholders said that 86% said yes, it was the right device, and 14% said no.
I have a question. Do you think that the way that you worded that question could lead students to think that it was all or nothing? So either because you don't say, is the iPad the appropriate device, or should something else be used? It's just specifically, is that the right device? So do you think students potentially could have thought?
And that was a group collaborative effort on how to phrase these questions. And it was that we were tasked, I believe you asked us specifically if the iPad was the right device. And I believe that's why we wrote the question that way. Is that right? The committee that was here?
To evaluate the current program.
To evaluate the current program. So that is why it specifically says that. But when I read that, I don't think it reads like all or nothing to me. Maybe you guys can give input. It wasn't like, you want to keep the iPad or have nothing. I think is the appropriate device. And I'm not sure that that's even the right question to ask. And I think we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay? We talked about the keyboard, how important it is a keyboard to your students to complete activities, and you can see the teachers' responses. 44% said very important, 35% said somewhat important, 21% said not important. The kids were a little different. Yes, I need one was 39%, and no, I don't need one was 61%. So the kids didn't feel as strongly about the keyboard. And then the parents were 22% said, yes, they need a keyboard, and 78% of parents said no. But we'll talk about this in a minute, we addressed this issue for the high school. This was walkthrough data that was shared with us. When we look at, of course, we're not very far, when we got this, we weren't very far into the 1920 school year. So the number of walkthroughs, when we look at the current 972, that will go up. Student use has gone down a little bit in terms of the walkthrough, which is that snapshot data. And then we kind of categorize things of the usage of the iPad. It's not that any of them are wrong, but it's a way to kind of show what level people are at, where they're implementing. So they're creating redefinition. We kind of almost make that a quad 4 lesson. And we work with teachers to give them examples of that. But we know that that's where we need to do more work. We got to help teachers become more fluent in that. When you look at the modification level, it's about the same. That is that higher level. And then the applying and the augmentation and the substitution. Substitution is very high. It's probably, quite honestly, done in every class every day. It's open your science book. Well, that happens to be on your iPad. And we have ELA, social studies, science. What curriculum am I missing? Math. Those are all done on the iPad. So truly, these two are probably done more than that. But we know this is something that we really need to address.
When you say this is something we really need to address, what do you mean by that?
Well, we need to do more training with high school teachers. And it comes very simply down to this, time. When is the time available to do that? So we might have an all-day district in-service, and we've got a lot to do during that day. And I think one time, all the high school teachers went to Avid. So we didn't get any of the high school teachers that day for that whole day training, but we got K-8. Those are the kinds of time issues we're talking about. When can we work with these teachers to help them become more fluent?
So when you say more fluent, though, you mean in using them at higher levels and allowing students to use the iPad at higher levels?
Helping teachers develop activities and lessons that are at a higher level.
I think something else our committee discussed, because these are, short snapshots. I walk in your classroom for 4 or 5 minutes, right, is what they're required to be in there. So while I might walk in, and I might be right in the middle of creating a movie, a podcast, Cougar Chat, if you went in and watched that, if they were just simply writing the script, from an administrative standpoint, that looks like substitution. They're just writing on their iPad, taking notes, when really they're actually doing a pretty big project, a redefinition, a modification kind of a thing. But in my 5 minutes while I'm there, I may only see that they were jotting down their notes and writing their script and interacting that way. And that might be interpreted on what we would maybe consider a substitution augmentation, when really the project as a whole, if I stuck around and was able to see some of those larger skills being going on, I might rank that higher if I came in towards the end of the hour. So that doesn't solve that problem. It's not making that graph better or worse, but it's letting our staff know, letting our principals know that that's kind of how this works. But also then training our teachers to be more engaging with their kids, to let them dig deeper into those skills, not just open my science textbook and go that route. We have the device, what else can we do with it?
So a couple more questions. So with these walkthroughs, they're district-wide, they're K-12, these numbers right here.
These numbers
No,
are
these are
high school.
Oh, this is specifically high school, great. And then, how long have we had iPads at the high school now?
8.
Okay, so this is the percentages that we're working with after 8 years of having iPads, okay?
We haven't used this specific walkthrough, though.
This is a
Yes.
brand new walkthrough
Yeah.
tool
So
that
they're
we
looking
only
at
started
different-
last year.
Year 2.
Yeah, we're in year 2 with this walkthrough tool.
Because I had to go into the old system to look up the.
Yeah.
Let's explain the walkthrough a little bit. So the walkthroughs are designed to be 3 to 5 minutes. Principals go in and they're encouraged to go in at different times to classes So don't always go into that science class for the first in the first 5 minutes of class. Try to make a visit early in the class, make a visit in the middle of the class, make a visit at the end of the class. So can you back up to the slide with the percentages? So when you see a percentage on there, this is something that the administrators have to witness in order to credit one of these categories, to credit that walkthrough, that during that 3 to 5 minutes, what they saw was a student using an iPad. So if they were doing an activity where the iPads were folded up and set aside because students were interacting with one another in a group activity, they would not credit that, hey, later in the class, they're going to use the iPad. Or prior to this discussion that they're having, that students use their iPad before they engaged in that conversation. I think like Casey tried to illustrate, if the end result is going to be a high-level lesson, if the principal isn't there during that 3 to 5 minutes to see that, if it's the work that leads up to that, they don't mark, whether it's with iPads or whether it's a quad D lesson or not, they don't mark that unless they see actual evidence during that 3 to 5 minutes. And the idea is, if we're successful in coming in at different times during that class over a period of time, we should get a picture of the kind of things that happen in that classroom. So it's not intended to be an all-encompassing evaluation of everything that happened in that lesson. It's a 3 to 5 minute snapshot in time that over the course of the year, if the principal is able to get in that classroom 6 or 8 times during the course of the year, and they're able to space those visits out, they should get a general idea of the types of activities that go on in the lesson.
So are you saying this data is accurate or not accurate?
Yeah, it's accurate.
I'm just saying,
But it's
you're
in
saying
that-
3 to 5 snapshots, and you're saying it's not necessarily indicative, so I'm just a little confused.
Yeah, so I'm just giving you the context for how that data is gathered. So the point being, you wouldn't look at that data, I wouldn't think that student use ought to be 100%. That's not what the data is intended to collect. The data is intended to collect what did the principal see given the visits that they made at various times. And that's consistent with, I don't think we've ever talked about iPads, and I'm pulling the 100% number out, saying we're going to judge our effectiveness by, is it being used 100% of the time? And I think to the contrary, we've said this is a tool and it ought to be used when it's appropriate to enhance what's going on in the lesson. But I just want you to have the context for how those walkthroughs function, and not have an expectation that a number is low necessarily because it's out of line.
So we knew that it was important that those teachers knew that we heard them. So we went to faculty meetings at the high school at the end of the school year last year to address what they commented on the survey and the changes we were going to make to assist them with their concerns. So to address the App Store and the distractions, what we told them was all students would then have their App Store locked. We had our own store, and teachers can request apps to be put in there. Plus, we put apps on there that we know everybody's going to use. Showbeam, Nearpod, kite testing, some of those basics, some of the Google apps, I think. And the next thing we did was we provided them with Apple Classroom, which helps them manage their class. So in Apple Classroom, as a teacher, I put you guys in my class, and I can see on my screen all of your iPads. And I can see what you're doing on all of your iPads. I can also lock your iPads to a certain website or to a certain app. I can also blank everybody's iPad to help the focus get back to me when I need it. So that was a classroom management app that we provided, and Casey did lots of trainings at the high school on that app to help the teachers with that. We also purchased Notability for all the students in the high school. When we first started our iPad initiative, we purchased Notability for everybody, and back in the day, it cost 50 cents a student. That has gone up quite a little bit in price, but what we were able to do when we switched systems was to recoup many of those licenses, and then we had to buy an additional 500 at a cost of $5 a license. But we will recoup those, and now we can reuse all of those. And when we told the high school staff about this, they started clapping. It is their very favorite app. The kids love it. It's their whole note-taking app. It's all about writing with your fingers, but you can type in it. You can color code. You can make notebooks and dividers. So now all students have Notability at the high school. We also purchased Nearpod for the entire high school. We had been buying e-backpack. Not only did we not want them anymore because we had Google Classroom and we had Shobi, they went out of business. So that was an easy decision to make. So we had some extra money, and so we bought Nearpod, which we had purchased for K-8. Until that time, we went ahead and purchased it for the high school. The other big thing that came up was keyboards, and we wanted to be able to help our teachers with that. So we bought 471 keyboards for all of the ELA classrooms. That includes the SPED ELA and the ESL classrooms. So it was 30 classroom sets were given out. We offered every student at the high school a keyboard free. All they had to do was fill out a form. We had 90 kids fill out the form, and 60 of those kids have picked up their iPads. So we were really surprised out of a school of 2,000 kids that the kids just didn't really want them. They found that when they were in their ELA classrooms and they had access to those keyboards, that was what they needed.
So they don't take those keyboards home out of
Yes,
the
they
ELA
do.
classroom?
Oh, not out of the ELA classroom. If they check one out for themselves, they do.
And did you just make an announcement that there's keyboards for all the students?
Well, we did two things. First, when they came for the iPad pickup, when they come back at the beginning of the school year to get their iPads, we told them about it. We had a QR code on the wall. All they had to do was scan it, and they could fill out the form. And we sent an email. Oh, and we put it on their desktop on their iPad. In the freshman academy, when we gave them their iPads, we talked to each freshman class about that, each personally, one-on-one. Gave them the location to fill out the form. It was on their desktop, and told them the process for that.
This is the current list of all the apps that are at the high school. This is kind of pairs up with that chart that we had earlier, just so you can kind of see the correlation now. So this, right now, there's 142 apps that we manage for the high school. So this is 912 only. And so it's actually reversed from the previous one, but you can see the productivity, science, creativity, ELA kind of going around. I think you had this in your packet as well. But again, it's just to give you a sense of what the teachers are requesting, what kinds of things are they wanting to use in their classrooms. Productivity are going to be things like Notability, those apps where it allows students to just be productive, calendars, note-taking apps, all those kinds of things. The science department has really taken off. We get quite a few requests from them. Creativity would be things where they're iMovie, where they're making things, clips, Canva. There's a number of apps that they're gonna fall into that category. Math, classroom management, things like Class Dojo, which is what the high school, or Ginny Wilson showed a little bit earlier. There's other apps like that are more appropriate for the high school level, so there's some of those as well. And then you kind of go on around the scale there, presentation, social studies, RP, assessment, music, and even some coding apps. So again, the point here was to show that there is a wide spectrum of what's being used at the high school, what teachers are requesting. Some of those were already in there because of the freshman pilot last year when we did the same thing with them. But we gave, when we met with the staff at the end of the year last year, at the end of that meeting, we gave them a list of here's every app that's already in your store. Over the summer, if you have apps that aren't on this list, send them to me and they'll be already on the first day of school, and everybody that sent something in, we had ready to go when they came to school on August 15th or whatever the first day was. But we tried to make sure that what they needed was going to be there when they arrived to school that day. And then since then, they just go in, it's a real quick form, they go in and say, hey, we want this app in our classroom, can you have it ready? And within 5 to 10 minutes, we can have that app in the store ready to go. It used to be in the past, it might take the end of the day before we can get that to them. We've really pared that down, and we're trying to respond within 5-10 minutes of saying, hey, do you want that app? You might need it right now, so I'm gonna get it to you right now, and try to make that accommodation for them. We tell teachers, give us some time, don't wait till the day you need it, if you can avoid it. But we know how teachers work, and we were all in the classroom at one point, so we kind of understand. I may decide right here and now I need it, so we're trying to accommodate that, so.
I noticed that there's no business apps on there. Is that?
There's no what?
That may not be a category they may be in the productivity without looking at that full list, I don't know. I know that there are some in there, they might also be categorized as math because of the type of app they are. It might just be how we categorize them. There are some, but I don't know that there are specific business category that we target.
So as a committee, we kind of collaborated and came up a list of pros and cons about each one of these different devices. We first looked at the iPad. A real pro for that is it increases engagement and creativity. It has that front and rear camera. And the committee and the survey showed that that was a critical need. You have to have both. It's the touch screen, and I will tell you that math teachers tell us if there's no touch screen, there's no use of having a device, because math can't work by typing things out. You have to be able to write. And so that was one that's a critical need. The iPad is a pro in that it has a vast number of creation apps. We know that creation piece is very busy. I think when we started the iPad initiative, there were about 500,000 apps in the App Store. Now there are over 3 million. So that has boomed. I think one of the things that we hear a lot of is the assistive technology piece on the iPad. There is no better device for special ed than the assistive technology and the apps for special ed. I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars worth of apps special ed has purchased to accommodate a really vast array of needs from those students. There's one app they buy called Proloquo to Go, and it's an app that gives kids the ability to speak who do not have verbal, what's the word for it? They can't verbalize. It gives them a voice. That app costs $300. It is well worth it for those students. And I think you've purchased 30 of them for students in our district. And what's amazing, what's beneficial is that so many of our kids had so many different needs. So it's not one app fits all these kids' needs. So they can go in and pick and choose, those teachers can pick and choose what app best accommodates that student's special needs.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
One thing that we've also found, and we talk a lot about special education because that's where we see a lot of that assistive technology. But if you walk around our schools, we have a lot of kids using assistive technology, built-in features of the iPad, who aren't classified as special education. They may just need the text a little bigger because they're hard to see. They have the colors reversed because it just works better for their eyes. So the device has lots of features, text to speech, so it reads it back to them because they're struggling to keep up. Those kinds of things are going on in our classrooms every day. It's amazing what they're doing with it in the SPED department. It is also all of our students have those ability to turn on those features, assistive touch, and all those things that make that a piece that makes it valuable for our kids. That makes the device that much more user friendly.
And in the class, if you've ever been in a 3rd or 4th grade or a 2nd grade classroom, writing is hard for children. The mere act of writing is a challenge. So when we're wanting them to create something, write it, that's one piece of it, but the act of doing it is another. Well, on an iPad, you can speak into the iPad, and it will type it for you. And that's a great way for those of us who were English teachers to teach voice. We try to talk about voice in your writing. Well, kids are so busy at that age worrying about just how to get the words in that voice they can't think about voice. I think most people, even our age, type maybe 30 words a minute, 35, is that less maybe? You can speak easily 140 words a minute. So if you think about a student who wants to get their thoughts out on paper, any student can speak to the iPad and it will type it out for them.
Is that only on the iPad? So Chromebook and laptop or MacBook?
There are special programs you can buy. I think,
The MacBook's gonna have some built-in stuff, because
It's an Apple
it's a
product.
high priority for Apple, assistive technology. If you look at their stuff, I mean, it's a high priority for them. So you're gonna have some features, not all of them, because some of them depend on the type of device you're using. There probably are some text-to-speech and things of that nature.
you could, I think you probably, I'm not familiar with any, but surely they might have some in their store. The things we thought that came out that were cons were, it doesn't work as well with Google. That recently got fixed with the new iPad OS 13 update, because now all the Google opens just like it does on a computer. In previous versions, you had to use the app, and it was a little bit watered down. There were some things kids couldn't do, but that has been remedied with this new release. It does not run all the applications used in the school. For instance, I know in the accounting classroom, they have specialized accounting software, and it only runs on a PC. And we know from talking to folks, it's a negative that there is no built-in keyboard.
So the Chromebook, some positives that came out of our discussions. One, it did have the keyboard functionality. It does work better with the Google. At that time, it definitely did. Lane kind of just touched on that with the change in iPad. That's different, but at this time when we were going through it, that was one of the comments that came up. Price, I think when folks talk about Chromebooks, and when you hear them or you see them in Walmart, they're $150 for a Chromebook. When you really look at it and look at the quality of that device, and then the requirements that are not only our committee but our staff in the surveys kind of said that we got to have a camera on the back and we need a touch screen. When you start adding those features in, that price is negligible, if not a little more expensive. You'll see in the cost comparisons to add those things in. But price, if you're looking at a base model, would be better. But as we discussed it, that actually became a little more negligible in the overall scheme. So there's the lower price models, don't have the touchscreen or rear face camera. And again, they don't run all the applications that our schools need and have installed. Is this where you want to cover those numbers?
Oh, it was last spring I did this. I looked at every piece of software and every piece of hardware that the high school teachers run and use. And there were 63 identified, and only 9 of those would work on a Chromebook. So what we're trying to evaluate, would a Chromebook be a good piece to come in and fit in with what was already there?
And how many of those have an iPad?
Some of them do not run on an iPad.
9 fit on the Chromebook, how many fit in the iPad of those 64?
I don't know that I counted that piece, because what the iPad has, I'll give you a good example. Smart Notebook does not run on a Chromebook, but runs on an iPad. So I didn't go through and evaluate. Actually, at that time, I think
Windows 10.
I did Windows 10 for that laptop evaluation and the Chromebook. So we were looking, would a Windows 10 machine be a better fit? And it does. It is a better fit. It runs more applications.
So last one on here was a laptop or a MacBook. Excuse me. Obviously the pro on that, both of those have a built-in keyboard. They're both going to work better with Google, the way it was at the time. This would be the best device that runs more of the applications in the classrooms. So if we go back to the accounting software that runs on a Windows PC, if we took that PC out and we gave them a laptop, they potentially could run it on their laptop. But as we discussed, that's probably not very realistic, because it has to be loaded then on the individual's laptop, and if they leave that class, drop the class, we have to uninstall it. So we're still going to have those PCs in there. but it would run more of the applications used at the high school. They don't have touch screens, at least the lower price models. The price of these is not quite twice the amount of a laptop or a Chromebook, so there's an issue there. And then depending upon the model, they may not have a rear-facing camera either.
Okay. So next we kind of gave you a cost of ownership. Just to review, we gave you two examples, one being next year, year one of switching, or just another year of continuing with the iPad. So we're gonna give you those breakdowns, and then the next one is just ongoing after that for either program. So to go on to next year, just to continue what we're doing, we'd be buying the 7th gen, which is actually a little bit bigger iPad. Apple increased the size of the iPad, which I think is great for our students, but it is just an incremental increase there. And we can stay with our current management system, which is specifically targeted at Apple products. And then if we didn't go with that, we switched devices, whether it would be Chromebooks or laptops, we would need to buy approximately 2,200 of those to switch the entire school over so that we're all on the same page. The Chromebook, like we talked earlier, we picked the X360, which is just, we got in a number of quotes from a company of different models, what other schools are using, what's kind of the things that are out there. This one did have the touchscreen and the rear-facing camera, which we determined were requirements. It would require some new management to be able to manage those devices, because our current one would not do that. And then we also gave you a price for a ThinkPad L570, which is our current laptop that we buy for staff and students use, or a MacBook Air, which would be an equivalent MacBook if we went that direction. That would be price equivalent to a regular laptop PC. And again, you can kind of see those. We could use Jamf if we went with a MacBook, but we'd have to use something different, or our current system if we stayed with a PC. So here on the second page are those breakdowns, and you have those, hopefully they're in front of you so it's a little easier to read, but in the first columns, staying with the iPad, again, cases, device management is perpetual. That's a license we already own. Apple TVs, wireless projection is something that our teachers enjoy doing because it allows them to be out in the classrooms, interacting with their students, not tied to their desk. That's already existing in every classroom, and we would buy some more keyboards to continue supporting that program if needed, and being able to supply those. So that's $212,000 just over to continue that program at the high school. Switching to a Chromebook would require 2,200 devices. That price of that one we chose was $335. Then we need cases for those as well for durability and protection of those devices to get them to survive, just like we do with the iPad for 4 years. A device management, those licenses would have to be purchased to continue that. Some training and some setting up of all that, plus training our staff as well as district or the high school staff. Wireless projection, we would have to do something different because the current project we use now is an Apple product, so that the Apple TVs talk to it, but a Chromebook and a laptop MacBook, either one would speak to that, so we'd have to replace those as well. And then the document camera, that's one of those pieces of hardware that Lane talked about earlier that won't function with a Chromebook, and so we need to repurchase those as well. So you're just a little over almost $20,000 there. And then a laptop and MacBook, sorry. Those are going to be in that 565, 570 range for both of those devices. Device management, again, will range from zero. We have to buy licenses, even though Jamf would do it. We have to have licenses for those devices at $10 a piece. Again, some wireless projection. If it was a MacBook, we wouldn't necessarily need that purchase because we already have the Apple TVs, but if we went with PC, we would have to purchase those. And so you're at $1,292. 1.3. So that would be year one, switching next year from an iPad to a Chromebook or a Mac / laptop, PC laptop. So this would be year two of any of the programs. So this would be 21, 22. We're still in the current 600 iPads and then the 600 Chromebooks or laptops as we continue. It probably wouldn't be the 7th gen. It probably wouldn't be that HP 360, but it'd be an equivalent, whatever's on the market at those times. And you can see the breakdowns then. To continue with the iPad, we would buy a little fewer keyboards because now we're really saturating the school with quite a few. So we wouldn't necessarily need as many, we'd need some replacements and those kinds of things. Just that would continue to be based on need. Chromebook, you're buying devices and cases, and then in a laptop MacBook, you're buying devices and cases there as well. Or sorry, just devices for that one. So you can see the breakdown of those three at 201, almost 202,000, 219 or 339 for year 2. And we would run that program the same we run the high school one, where we buy 600, that covers all the freshmen, they would keep that device for their 4 years, and then, so every year they'd be getting a new one. So at this point, then it just becomes a yearly cost that we continue to go through.
So when we met again this year, we kind of went through the process to ensure that the way we felt we did the process, we wanted to make sure the committee agreed that these are the steps we took. Talked more again about the device, and then what should we do. So one of the things that came up, and she's not here this evening, but one of the business teachers, Samantha Payne, is on the committee, and talked about, she has desktops in her classroom because of the application she runs. And she talked about teachers getting laptop cards and moving them into their classroom or going to the labs for different activities. And for some, it's a hassle. So we got to thinking about all the different devices we currently have up there. So currently, and this was a quick count, Jason got it back to me within a day or two, so I'm sure it's not as good as you are 100%, but this is his inventory quickly getting back to me. 131 staff members up there do have laptops. 16 teachers also have desktops sitting in their classrooms. There are 10 laptop cards for a total of 165 laptops available to students. There's 85 Macs, there's 377 desktops. So when you add all that up, there are 774 other devices in that building. 147 of them, based upon those counts, are designated as teachers, and the other 627 are designated for students. That's a 1-to-3 ratio of other devices available to our kids. When we began the technology plan back in the 90s, our goal was 1 device for every 5 students. So when we talk about Garden City High School, we have a 1-to-1, and we also have a 1-to-3. That's a lot of devices. Now, are those devices available to every kid at every time? Absolutely not. We have MacBooks in art, in journalism. A kid might not be able to walk in there and use that Mac at any given time. Some of the laptop carts that are mentioned up there are for Mr. Drabinsky. So the robotics. He's got some Chromebooks. He won a Samsung set of Chromebooks from Samsung, and if I'm not mistaken, he's a finalist again. Yeah. So we'll have some more devices. So those probably aren't available, to a kid wants to write a paper. They're not going to go get a gaming laptop to write a paper. But it shows us that our kids have a vast array of devices in that building available to them. And I think the bottom line, what this shows us and our plus and minuses, there is no one perfect device. There are pros and cons to every device. I use, at work, if I'm using Excel, I might want to use a desktop. But I can use Excel on an iPad in a pinch. It still functions just fine. I want to take notes, I may use my iPad. So for our kids going out in the world, and I think I'm in the real world, there is no one device that they're going to use for everything. So I think it's important to note that there are other options for them at that building.
I think we talk about career and college readiness a lot. And I think instead of saying what's the device, it's are we supplying our kids? Are we giving our kids exposure and access to the devices that they're going to need in their future? So if I'm a broadcasting student, I'll be down in the broadcasting lab using the Macs. If I'm in the AutoCAD track, I'll be down in the AutoCAD computer lab that has souped up laptops to run that software. If I'm an art student, I'm using Photoshop. So we look at this and we say, and I think Dr. Kipp can talk more to this, we're giving our kids the tools they need for whatever future track they're on. And they're choosing that track, and then they have access to the tools that they need for that track.
mentioned at that meeting kind of the comparison of schools that have Chromebooks and what other devices are in that school. I mean, I think that was what kind of brought up that conversation, and that a lot of the schools who have the Chromebooks may not have this array of devices available at those schools, if I'm remembering her comment
Yeah,
correctly.
I think they were talking typically about when it's a Chromebook initiative, that's what they have. The teachers have Chromebooks, not the laptops or a desktop. And I think in the computer labs, she was saying the school she came from, where she taught before, that was just the Chromebook that they had.
I think one of the things too on the software side that I think we're proud of in technology is our kids can use Shobi, they can use the Google, they can use Microsoft, we can use Nearpod. There's an array of things they could use and learn, so when they go to the next site, whatever that might be, technical school or education or work, they have seen a lot of different things. If you go to Fort Hays, you're going to use Google, I believe. If you go to Kansas State, you're going to use Google or Microsoft. I don't remember what Samantha Payne said about Lawrence, and this was when I was visiting her classroom, watching her use Google. I don't remember what they use there. But anyway, we're proud that we are giving them the options. We're proud that we have all of this, as well as a small device to stick in their backpack and work on whenever they need. So in the audience this evening are some of our committee members, as well as 2 board members and a financial officer. So at this time, if any of you have any additional things to say, one way or the other, this is your time to shine.
When I was in Fulham doing my student teaching, we had Chromebooks there, and I know as an English teacher, I did use it for that, but it was just typing. That was pretty much it. The only communication side of it was typing notes to other students using comment sections. In the math classroom, when I was doing my SPED portion of it, we didn't use the Chromebook at all. And then when I was at university, we were a laptop one-to-one school. And I used my laptop in specialty classes or in the English classroom, but math, I never touched it. My psychology and sociology classes, we didn't use it because the professors didn't want a big screen in between us and them. It was also harder to take notes because you had to type them out, so if you want to do any annotations on the side, you really couldn't do that. So I do like the iPads. I have a laptop card in my classroom because I do 3D design, but my kids are also on their iPads, so they can watch videos on how to do the design. That way they can work at their own pace, and they're on the laptops doing the design process.
I think it's also important to note again that there's not one device that is the right device for Garden City High School. We have so many technology pieces in place and so many curricular pieces in place that the students have what they need 90% of the time, 95% of the time to do what they're tasked to do in that particular course. The iPad is a good device. I won't say it's the right or the correct device, because I don't think there is one. I don't know how many of you have cell phones here. Some people may say it's the Samsung that's the right device, or the iPhone that's the right device. Hopefully it's not your flip phone anymore. But that's why we have to keep looking at the technology, is because it has changed considerably and quickly. So going from a BlackBerry to a flip phone to an iPhone 11 or whatever number they're at now, is important to keep up with. So looking at these devices is a good question to ask. Are we providing a device that can fit the needs of our kids to do what they're supposed to do within the curriculum of the school? Not is it the right device for every kid at every moment when they're at Garden City High School. So when you look at those percentage numbers of walk-through data, or if you ask somebody what they're using their iPad for at any given time, it certainly won't be 100% of the time. And it shouldn't be. A lot of learning takes place without the use of this technology. It's important to have because they're going to be using it in the future. But more importantly is how they're using it and when they're using it. And within that curriculum, are they using it correctly to understand the material that people are teaching? and what we're expecting them to do after high school. So I think the committee did a pretty good job of evaluating those questions. I'm not sure that the original question, is it the right device, is it a correct device, or is it an appropriate device, is really what we're trying to see. We're really looking at what are we providing students, what tools are we providing them, and are those tools an effective way of getting them to understand what we're trying to get them to be capable of doing in the future. If we were just with the iPad in and of itself, and we gave out 2,000 iPads, and we had a kid go to a business class, and we had a kid go to an art class, and we had a kid go to an English class, it probably wouldn't be a very effective system. No matter how many apps we provide, no matter what other things we provide within technology, if we don't provide the instruction in a variety of technology and a variety of ways to get that material, then I don't think the iPad would be the savior of what we're doing. It's not. Neither would a laptop, neither would a Chromebook, or whatever device they have. In and of itself, that's not the end-all be-all. It's how they're using it, when they're using it, how often, and how effectively. So when we're going through a walkthrough, we're not just looking at, oh, they're using the iPad and they're using it to take a video. We're looking at, just like we would with anything in the curriculum, how are they learning that? What are they doing? Are they problem solving? It's not the technology that's teaching them to do that, that's them doing it and using their own capabilities to get ahead. And that's what we want the technology to assist with. Hopefully a pencil can do that sometimes too. It can also be a distraction. Because I remember when I was a kid, we played tic-tac-toe instead of, whatever was being taught. So it doesn't matter which device, you're always going to have distractions. And I think we've tried to make an attempt to get those distractions out of the classroom. But that can happen with anything, whether it's an iPad, a Chromebook, a phone. So really, I think it's a good process and a good system that we have in place. Still needs to be evaluated quite often because technology is moving forward so quickly. And what the kids need to know once they're done with high school is going to be different as well. I have 2 kids up at K-State. Do they use their iPad a lot? No. They're no longer in a situation where that is needed. What they need is very specialized devices for their curriculum because it's their career path now. So my son, who's an engineer, is using something completely different in terms of his technology than my daughter is, who's graduating with an English degree. They just need different things. So I think we've done a good job of providing not only the iPad, but additional curricular technology to help them out.
Yes, Jean?
I have a question, and I don't think it's probably something we necessarily looked at from the committee, but I was wondering if you have an opinion or any information on both the durability comparison and the lifespan comparison of what you've looked at.
Yeah, I think with our time frame with the iPads, we're pretty comfortable knowing that life cycle's, we're pretty sure 4 years is gonna survive. And that's why our K-8 is set up on a 4-year plan. And lots of schools will Apple will push us towards 3, but we're comfortable with 4 because we've seen the results of that. The Chromebook, I think as you go up in model, like we've talked about the little higher price model that we're looking at, that durability goes way up. Obviously in the laptops we buy now, they're pretty rugged and pretty durable. They last 6 years is our rotation, 7 years is our rotation for laptops. MacBooks would be similar to that. I think the Chromebook, if you go down in price, they would not make it, just from our understanding of the build quality. We have seen some, we've tested some, we've had our hands on some, and there are, with any device, the lower we go on that price point, the durability goes down as well, and longevity goes down as well. I don't have an exact number for you.
No, I
Jean,
was just
but-
curious as to how much we get for our money and how
Right.
long it can be used. So.
We're still using iPads that are technically 10 years old at this point in some of our elementaries. They're past their prime, obviously, but like Dr. Kipp was saying, they fit the needs of where those are at. We have schools that won't give them up because they need a device that just gets on the web and does something, and if they have the other part. But the fact that we have those devices still out there and they're able to be used by schools for certain factors, that's a testament to that over there. So, sorry, just one last slide. So after our committee has met all these times and had all discussions and looked over the data, at this point, we don't have any compelling reason to change devices at this point. Our data supports that we continue to use the iPad based on the surveys that we showed you, based on our students and our teachers. We do know that we need to have a renewed focus on professional development with our staff, just to continue to increase their level of engagement with the device and how they can bring about those higher level skills in our kids. Again, they're always going to be in those lower levels, substitution, augmentation, but what can we do to promote getting them to dig into those higher skills when it's appropriate, when the time is right for that. But we know that that's going to take some training, and we have a renewed interest in investing in that time. And again, like Lane said, it's a matter of time, but we'll have to find it. Like Roxy shared on a couple of slides ago, we do have a large number of other devices available that fit the needs for those specialized software. For our business folks who said, well, the iPad doesn't really do what I need it to do, they're right. And I know we had some responses like that. Samantha's on the committee said, you know, the iPad just doesn't fit for what I need. But those classrooms, those folks have the devices they need, like Dr. Cook was saying, that we're providing all those areas with what they need. And we'll continue to look at that. And if somebody says, well, what I have in my room isn't working, we'll continue to evaluate that as well. And then we'll just continue, we know with the iPad, with our management software, they are on the cutting edge. They're ready on day one with any Apple updates. They see 0-day management, so we're always kind of on that cutting edge of being able to provide our teachers and our students with new management capabilities, things that help with the other concerns they shared, like distractions. And we hear from parents, what do I do with my kid when they bring it home, and how to keep them distracted. So there are new features coming. There are some already available for parents that we're working through now to provide training for. But there will be new stuff coming for our staff next year to also help go beyond Apple Classroom, again, to help with device management and helping kids stay on task and doing the things that we asked them to do. So with all those things being considered, the committee was recommending that we stay with the current device.
Do you have any magic epiphany on how to create time for training?
No, because we've tried a lot of different options. I think the principals would agree that we've tried to look at PLCs, and it turns out almost every PLC, they're, you know, for the most part, they're pretty well booked, because there's, quite honestly, there's a lot of initiatives going on in our district that affect all grade levels, not just high school, but when, you know, we've had numerous conversations like, okay, I'm ready, we can do a PLC. Well, I got 5 minutes here, but because we're doing Avid, or we got, you know, we only got 10 minutes because we got what's the safety one? Alice training, sorry, we're doing Alice refresher. I mean, it's a fight for time, and everybody's fighting that same battle. It's not just tech looking for time. All those groups are looking for that, so I think it's a renewed interest in saying, okay, what days can we set apart? The high school admin, at their request, we brought in an Apple gentleman in October, came out and worked with our admin. All admin in the district were invited. We had some from the intermediate schools and some from the elementary come as well. Just to talk about taking those next steps with their staff. What does it look like? Mr. Norby was the one who kind of approached me about setting that up, and his comment was, what do I do now that I've got my teachers here? When they come in, I've done a walkthrough and I've seen kind of a similar repetition kinds of things. What can I do to work with that teacher to go, here's what you can do next? What's the next thing? What's something else you can do to continue teaching your curriculum? Because the end goal is the learning, right? But what can the device do that you maybe haven't thought of? What's something I can use this device to support you to continue along that path? Not just to plug the iPad in for the iPad's sake, but what can we actually do to improve instruction for that teacher? So we did that in October. I think they're working on some ideas of what we can do out of that. I know at the intermediate centers, we're already working with them this month to do some things that they learned out of that training. The intermediate principals were there, and we're really excited. So we're doing some stuff with their whole staff here at the end of December. So there are things like that that are kind of starting to roll, but again, it's just finding the time.
One of the things, Mr. Gates is our technology coach, and he's got to be charged with Google And then Lainey and Casey at one of the staff development days did kind of on-demand training, kind of walked them through how to get into Microsoft, Google, and I don't remember the third one. Apple. So to do training on teachers' own time, because there is no time during the day. And you can try after school, but most of them want to go home and be with their kids, just as we do. Speaking, I don't have any kids at home, but, and then Casey and Mr. Gates have also done 5, 10, 15 on-demand training on little snippets of things, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If a teacher happens to have that much time, then here's a little thing they can do with tech.
So you guys mentioned college and career readiness, and you mentioned the apps that they might use at Voorhees or K-State. So are they using iPads in college?
Yeah, and I think we had some good discussion around that, because I think if you look around, there all devices everywhere. One that I know of for sure that I sat through at a conference I was at, the Ohio State University was there, which I know is a ways from us, but it is a major university. They handed out iPads to every single freshman this past year, so they're in their second year of that program. So that's one major university, but we looked at K-State has.
gives all education measures an iPad, but every college at K-State focuses on the right tool for that group. So my daughter was in Mass Comm. She used a Mac. Well, fortunately, she was in communications classes at the high school, and so she was familiar with the Mac. So that worked for her, and who was it, was in engineering? Oh, it was your son, wasn't it? So they use a souped up,
Yeah.
I think Missouri, and Missouri does iPads, I can't remember, but, so there's a variety, they're all over the place. Some schools are O365 schools, some schools are Google schools. So it's really great that our kids get exposed to all of those things. Because who knows what they're gonna, at K-State, they use Google and O365.
If they go to Goodland, the tech school, it's iPad based. They have coding programs, their auto tech uses it. I mean, that's the device they use at that school as well. And that's actually K through the end of that 2-year, 3-year program at the tech school. They're iPad all the way through.
So this is some of the research I was hoping to see, because when I did research, it says that 80% of college students are still using laptops. And I read some of these where iPads are being handed out to every student, but that was one of the numbers that I read. So I was really looking for more research data in terms of what's the best device. My other question with that and along those same lines, we're talking about college and career readiness, is what industries out there are using iPads?
The medical industry.
Fully iPads.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
you.
you're fine.
The medical industry is really taking off, I think, and I don't know if you can speak to that some, but I know that nursing programs, when I go to these conferences, like with our GEM company, they bring in large industry people who are talking about not just iPads, but device choice, but the medical industry is really taking off with it. I sat through Children's Hospital in San Diego, one of the largest children's hospitals, with Apple devices throughout, Apple TVs. They walk in, they turn it on, they sign in with their Apple ID, and the Apple TV has all their content on it. So they're sitting in their room, they can see their medical history, they can watch Netflix, they can do all these things in that hospital that they want to do. They wipe it when the kid walks out for privacy rights, and then the next patient comes in and they use it. So there are large corporations going that direction, and medical fields, or other fields as well. Auto technician is another one. I know that at Goodland, that program is based on that, because there's a lot going in that direction as well.
So looking in our community, I was actually really surprised that you didn't have any community or business members on your steering committee, because I would have liked to maybe had input from what their people are using in our community. What devices, I mean, what expectations do they have of kids coming out of high school, an ability to use? And
That was a question on the parent. That was a question in
Oh,
the parent
Oh,
survey.
we asked the parents what they use.
There are some questions in the parent survey
yeah,
about
that
what
was
they're
interesting,
using in
because
their
the number of them is
community.
iPhones. So I was like,
I know.
what work is
Their
that?
eyes are better than mine. I think and I think you bring up a good point, but if you go out and you go shopping for a day. So you go to Target, and those people are using these little handheld scanners, and they scan for inventory, and then the checkout people are using it's a computer, but cash register. If you go into the bank, they use totally specialized software, and every bank's probably different. If you go to...
If you eat out, a lot of them now have an iPad.
They have an iPad, and they swipe it, if you go to Applebee's, they have a little touch screen that's screwed onto your table, insisting that you give a bigger tip than you wanted. I haven't noticed that. So I think it depends on where you go, because so many people are developing their own stuff right now. You know, if you're a secretary, you're going to use Office. Whether it's on a PC or a Mac, you're going to use Office. But then you start getting into those very specific businesses, and I think it's just all over the board.
And I think the mobility of the device lends itself to some of those other fields where I'm on the go. I'm not sitting in an office, I'm not sitting at a desk, I'm up measuring something. I worked with Davis Electric over in Cimarron. They switched all their staff over to iPads, so they're going out, because they're mobile, they can't carry around a device and do all the things that they need to do. So they're taking pictures of plugins and looking at all the plans are digital. So they're doing that training with those guys was hilarious, because they just weren't very techy. It's just a great group of guys. But to watch them go, what do you want me to do with this thing, and really get them there. When we loaded all the plans from their job site, and they weren't carrying around all those papers, they could just zoom in and go, oh, that's where that plugin is supposed to be, actually right there where I'm standing. I mean, that mobility feature is what I think a lot of businesses are being attracted to, is that function.
And I didn't have a ton of time to research that type of thing, so I did reach out to economic development and just ask them what they thought. And it's kind of what you're saying is I feel like the iPads are a great accessory to many of these industries, but they said that kids are lacking the word processing and general computer skills that are still needed in today's workforce. Laptops and desktop computers are still what is being used in businesses far more than iPads. Would you say that's probably accurate? She did goes, we see iPads being used as an accessory or tool when they need to run slideshows, smartboards, etc. So I'm just saying that she's saying it's used more as an accessory, like
What
the
is
slider and that.
Every kid has to take computer classes at the high school.
Yeah,
Right,
we have a half credit requirement for graduation of a computer course. Typically, that's either computer apps or Windows applications, which is equivalent to learning Microsoft Office, word processing, those sort of skills. In those classes, they use a lab that is built for that classroom. So we have desktops or laptops in the classroom setting for that class. So before they graduate, they're going to take at least one class in which they have a lab setting in addition to having their device.
Are those type of apps more user-friendly on a laptop than an iPad
Well, word processing?
for the computer classes that you were talking about?
Windows, if you get Windows apps on your, on the iPad.
Is that how the students take it?
No, they have it on laptop or desktop within that classroom setting.
So that's on
And
the-
anytime they're outside of that classroom, if they're working on it, they'll be using their iPad.
So they have
So
the
they have
same
multiple
apps.
platforms to use that same software.
They have all, I think what you're asking
I
is,
think that
they
happens
have
anyway
all the
now.
same access to all those same
All the
word
business apps
processing.
for computer
Not
apps.
all.
Not the
Not
business
all.
specific, but Microsoft, the word processing, the spreadsheets, those things that you referenced in your note, those are available through, Google has their own version of that. Microsoft obviously is this industry standard, and then Apple has their own version of that. So there's actually 3 separate word processing, note-taking, presentations, spreadsheets, that they have the access to all of those on every device, whether it's the PC or their iPhone. Actually, the kids could have it on their phone because they have licenses for it, their iPads as well.
Okay, and then lastly, sorry to ask so many questions, but, so you talked about a different management system being needed in UHAD, but you have several different devices already in there, so what,
The
can you
take-home
explain
devices.
to me?
Yeah, the devices that we mentioned here all stay at the school unless some kids device one. But the management piece is really how to manage the apps and then how to track them when you're out and about.
And manage the restrictions. 'Cause on the iPads, we set restrictions to keep them out of the App Store, to keep them out of FaceTime and messages and texting and that kind of stuff that you would have on a mobile phone. We block all that stuff on the iPads to help with that focus.
Yeah.
We would need to do those same things on any
Personal.
device, quite honestly, any
One
device that's gonna
device.
be in their hands all the time.
And it has to be a different system than what you already have.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to take up all the time. Any other questions, board? Comments?
I just want to comment on all the work done by the team. I think you've got a great team together there and a lot of effort to it, so. And it seems like just the one meeting that I was able to attend, that you were very responsive to the teachers too, particularly the ones that needed the diversification in technology. So kudos to all of you for your time, and particularly staff hanging in late in the board meeting here for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, I did have one more question, sorry. So you said that we would have to do it all at once, for 2,000 devices. Why is that?
Well, we talked a little bit about that, and when we started the initiative, the one-to-one, it was when we built the new high school, so we had the funds to do it. But even then, talking about how would you phase it in? So if we started with freshmen, maybe we could do that, but once you get past that point, these kids are intermixed. So a teacher's doing a classroom activity, and if kids have different devices, then it adds the complexity for the teacher. Plus now we're paying for 2 systems, and we're managing 2 systems. So I think you guys are the ones going to be implementing it, but I would say it's easier to do it all at once.
I think for training purposes, and I think the bigger consideration was what Roxy said, it's, once they get out of that freshman level, you could have a senior and a freshman and a sophomore all sitting, and a junior all sitting next to each other, sophomore, junior, senior, all sitting next to each other in a class, where now the teacher's got to plan lessons differently based on which kids are in the room and what devices they have, because not everything is going to function the same on every device. So for training purposes and for those purposes to help keep everybody on task, and provide the least amount of frustration for our end users, which is our teachers and our students, it's better to roll it all out.
So that 2,200 is for the entire high school?
Yes.
Kids and
Staff and schools.
Oh, and staff. Okay, thank you.
When you do have some classes with all 4 that use that technology, because like band and orchestra,
Absolutely.
they require their students to record themselves and then send it in to the director. So you're still having 4 grades in some classes. So.
Sure. Thank you.
So is that just the presentation, or?
So you guys have to do a report on that.
Lastly, thank you again. 2020-21 calendar priorities.
Yes, ma'am. So, we're gonna revisit the calendar committee charge. So you guys have got a few weeks to look at that. I have not had any questions about that, so I just want to open up to the board to answer any questions you might have, and then ultimately, if there are no changes, to make a approval, have the board approve the charge, so we can get started on the process with the calendar. So, do you have questions?
Mine's just the same one that I put out there last time, and it's just the teachers saying, is it possible to have conferences different for the elementary versus the upper grades? Is it possible to create a calendar?
Well, it would be possible to do that, but there would be, so as part of the process for the calendar committee, we could certainly look at doing that. And you just have to weigh out the pros and cons of doing it. Parents' availability, going to multiple buildings at different times of the year to attend conferences. I mean, could that be a plus? Could that be a negative? You'll have some kids in school during that time and others not, so transportation issues, communication of the split calendar. So yes, it's possible to do that. It would just be a matter of is it the right decision to do that?
Is it something we can put on the survey just to get an idea of thoughts and feelings about that?
Sure.
I would like to see that personally. I don't know the rest of the.
Okay.
Well, I'll be the first to volunteer a directive, which is not a particularly popular one, but I would like to, from my own personal standpoint, I'd be opposed to seeing the number of days in school reduced. What are we at, 193?
Student contact, 174 and a half.
I knew it.
Yeah. We'll take one. We'll put you on record as 193.
No, wait a second.
So reducing the number of days?
I would be opposed to reducing.
You would be opposed?
Yes, I've had interaction with, some instructors who have advocated for fewer days, especially when they feel like, their salaries have been held back through no fault of necessarily anyone in this room, that they feel like if we cut back the number of days, it would be wrong increasing their compensation. But I would go on record as saying, personally, I oppose that.
I don't know how the question is worded, but I know there's a question about, would you be willing to go past Memorial Day or something like that? But I'm wondering if we couch it in a way that says something to the effect of, if it meant more days off during the course of the year. So like, I mean, because if you're looking at the summer gap, it's because of how much time is in summer. So if you go beyond Memorial Day, but you're spattering in, say, all of the federal holidays, so kids are getting off, teachers are getting off, and then reducing that summer gap, so to speak. But I think we've just been like, how important is it to get off before Memorial Day? But I'm wondering if we take it one more step and say, okay, if you get more days off during the course of the year, how important is Memorial Day?
Yeah, we if I remember correctly, not having it in front of me, but we did something of that nature, kind of in parentheses, that if you want to start later, are you willing to start later and push it past, Memorial Day, or by adding in 11, 14 federal holidays, that there's a chance you can have all of those, certainly, but in doing so, there's another effect. And I think we put some kind of a clarifier in there to the question, but we can look at the wording certainly on that. Other thoughts?
I want to clarify something if I may. I said something sort of in jest in a private conversation, and it sort of took off, I think, like malicious malware. And I am not an advocate at this time for year-round school.
He's the source.
So,
He comes
Dr.
clean.
Lincoln's on record for 193, Mark's got year round.
I mean, if he's gonna say I'm not an advocate, I want to say that, I am not an advocate at this time for year-round school,
Okay.
just for the record.
How do you feel, Mark, about the same number of days or fewer days of student contact?
Oh, I'm open to all the conversations right now about trying to address the summer slide.
I was asking more about total number of contact days.
So the charge on the draft, I don't know if you have it or not, so just the draft is maintain the current number of contact days for students, and right now that's 174 and a half. So that's
Well,
what.
several years ago, we added contact days, as I recall, and added pay to salaries accordingly, to try to address some specific issues. And unless there's good data to say we can accomplish what we've accomplished with less days, and I'm not aware of any of that data, then I don't know how I could advocate for changing the contact days.
Other thoughts? So we do have some calendar committee meetings scheduled, so we are asking the board to approve this tonight. And I think that, from what Mr. Hogan's told me, it was helpful for the committee last year as they went through their process.
I thought your calendar last year was a significant improvement over the years previous to that.
Thanks, it was, so the charge of the board is very useful. Anecdotally, I think that was probably the fastest process that we've had in a number of years, going through it, with some complications of having, one of the back-to-back days that we utilize for training. And again, it's a jigsaw puzzle, so you put something in here, you have to take something away someplace else, and balancing all of those kinds of things, but it was a fairly fast process. So I do think the charge is super helpful, and for those of you who have not served on that committee, in terms of questioning and tweaking questions, we rely on that input. We look through all of the comments that we get back and wrestle with that and try to come up with the best calendar for kids that we can. But there's a lot to it. It's a fairly big process. So appreciate the board's support in that and direction in that. And just to review, we have maintained the current contact days, maintain a monthly collaboration component, consider the additional days for break that may include federal holidays, and then having a calendar to the board no later than March 2nd. So if you guys are okay with that, we would ask that you take action and approve that tonight.
I would so move.
Second. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, lastly, board open discussion. Tim, you have anything to start?
Sure. They're all gone, but the people that worked on the technology committee, put a lot of work into it. I confess to being incredible skeptic of the iPad situation, probably mostly influenced by several things. Number one, the percentage of schools using iPads now is down below 20%. Makes me wonder if we're the smart 80% or the smart 20% or the opposite. I do still feel like kids are losing keyboarding skills. I watch my kids and my kids' friends keyboarding, and I don't know how you reverse that. But not being able to keyboard when you get into a professional environment has been a challenge in my office. And most of the people I employ are straight out of high school. I also was somewhat influenced by the fact that since my kids only had access to iOS software, I found myself in the frustrating position of buying Mac laptops for the kids, which were triple the price of a normal laptop. And I wondered to myself whether or not other parents are not being put in the same position when kids become used to iOS software. But I think what I'm coming to the decision is that I think that the device itself is becoming less and less important. What's happening is that apps are becoming ubiquitous from device to device, and now you see things like Google taking over word processing, taking over scheduling, and I think we're probably headed towards independence from devices, or at least relative independence from devices. But having said that, I appreciated the real thoughtful process that everyone went through to come to that. Did I agree with everything that you presented? No, I didn't. But I sure appreciated the process, and I can respect that and support it. That's all I have.
To kind of tail on that, at the time, I was the only board member on the tech committee when they were doing it, and I was trying to take what was being said in these meetings and trying to explain to the board or to the committee what information it was that you were looking for based off of what you were saying basically last year. So if there was any information that was lacking, it's probably my fault because I was doing the best I could to make sure they were getting the information to you that I believed you were requesting. But there was a lot of thought in some of the elementary teachers as well. Keyboarding is a 4th grade standard. I did not realize that. So they're supposed to be learning that in 4th grade, which was another discussion that we had about getting keyboards to the iPads for the 5th and 6th graders too. Maybe not to take home, but that was discussed as well. So they are trying to react to the information to make these the best that they can for the students and helpful for the teachers, not a distraction. As for other open discussion issues, this weekend is the KASB conference. If you know any board members from our Region 10, I would appreciate it if you would talk to them, because I have competition for the Region 10 VP position this year. So that vote's at 8:30 on Sunday. So hopefully we can beat Dodge, because Dodge is my competition. So, but that's this weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. It's always a great conference, so with great topics, and it looks to be a great one this year too. So that's all I've got.
I'm looking forward to attending that as well. And I don't have anything else for that.
Jean?
Well, I just wanted to let you know that I had attended the last really focused meeting on the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Bullying that the state board had set up. And that was in Topeka today. There were 36 people who were on that committee, and it covered a variety of different people in the field of education and in sort of social emotional areas as well, at the college level and in the legislature and a lot of different folks. There were about 8 meetings around the state, including one here in Garden City at Horace Good, and a couple of dozen presentations by people on all different aspects of bullying, solutions for dealing with that. And so right now I've been just watching the committees voting on the recommendations that they approved as I was leaving today. And I am sure it'll probably get approved and presented to the state board next week. And it'll provide some guidance and more focus, I think, on trying to deal with that issue, because it's so pervasive everywhere. And I think it'll really help having some standards for that across the state. So that's all I wanted to mention.
I'm not forgetting about Tim, he has to go last, so I'll just say, so it may have been obvious from my questions that I'm not convinced that the iPad is the right technology for the upper grades. Didn't surprise me that the walkthrough data for creating and analyzing is so low, because that's what the data, that's what the idea of iPads is. It's a device to consume, not produce. And if we're talking about relevance and rigor from middle school up, then I just think that we need to be looking at what our students are expecting once they get out of high school. And I don't see the iPad other than as an accessory. So I appreciate the time and effort put in, but this is what sometimes is frustrating, is that they presented us information that had dollar signs over $1 million, and yet we had a committee with no people from the community, no business people, and yet we've had other decisions and committees form where all they're doing is bringing a recommendation of information that was researched and other things. So I don't like the discrepancy in how these are done, because there should be some similar process. I get that it doesn't have to be the same each time, but it is frustrating to me when, Tim can throw out some statistics and I can throw out statistics, but I didn't hear any of that type of information from the committee, and that is what we should be using to make good decisions. I mean, there's value in surveys and student surveys, but I really wanted more data about what's out there. Are we using the right thing? Because that is what they're going to face when they get out into the real world. I don't think so. So that's where I am on that. Tim?
Okay, thanks. Good information. So, the good news for me is our daughter had her first grandbaby last Sunday. Had a little complication, so Penny had to go up to, she lives in Arizona, so she'll be heading home, I think, on Wednesday. For the conference, Stephanie, can you send me where I'm staying? I know you did, but I can't find it. Let's see, so Our next meeting is December 19th at 5 PM. That will be my official last meeting. I have a commitment at 5 PM and asked that that be scheduled at a different time. It obviously, we couldn't do it, so on a sad note, tonight's my last meeting. So I've enjoyed my time and appreciate all you guys' leadership and wish you the best in the years to come for the new person coming on board. You're still here till 9:20, so get used to some of that stuff. So, thank you.
Tim, thank you for serving.
You bet.
And it's been a pleasure to work with you, and you've been very supportive and encouraging and just a great mentor, and I appreciate
Well,
everything
you
you've
guys
done for
have
me
taught me a
personally.
lot, very smart people, so my mom always said, be around smart people, and you guys are the best, so thank you for your leadership, and I know we're in good hands, so. And that includes you, Dr. Carlin, and your leadership staff. Oh, I would like to take a group picture, I'm sorry Jennifer's not here, but we can take a group picture, before we go into executive session. Are we still doing that at 9:30?
Yeah, we,
Of course.
and Tim, I apologize, we have a nice plaque for you. It's still at the place that makes the plaques because we were a little shorthanded.
So maybe I'll try to sneak in on that last meeting, but we're ringing the bell at Salvation Army, and they said that you now have to do it for 2 hours, and the way we're doing it, the boys have to split up, and we need adults there, so I made that commitment 2 months ago without realizing it, so, or a month ago, so. I appreciate that, you don't even need to do a plaque though, so.
I just wonder if we can get him back to another meeting and get a
Get some cake.
picture with it.
I'd rather have some
Yeah,
cake
there
and
you
ice
go.
cream.
Well,
You guys
like
have a late
it.
meeting.
I think it's been 8.5 years. I think you get to serve an extra half year there because of the change in the law, and you've provided some outstanding leadership for this board and the school district and this community, and so thank you for all your time and dedication, because it doesn't pay what it's worth for sure. So,
Well, my iPad's still hanging on, but might as well. They say it won't take any more updates.
All right, then. The next board meeting, thank you. The next meeting of the Board of Education will take place on Thursday, December 19th, 2019 at 5 PM in the board meeting room at the Educational Support Center. We'll do an executive session. You wanna do the picture? Oh, before I make that, yeah.
Please.
I think Jennifer.
She is here, yeah, Jennifer is here.
Oh, awesome. Good deal. Got here just in time.
Should we hold you up, Tim, like?
We need to cover this up right here.
I think we should take another clock.
We were just waiting on you.
Oh, I just can't miss this part.
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
That was fun. That was definitely fun. Did you get us all in there?
I can. All right, here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, hold your positions. I have to take one of Jean's phone. Okay. Got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hate that
So you'll reach out to me on that.
Yeah.
Just reach out to me whenever
Yeah.
it's.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Send me that picture.
I did. Yeah, and I'll send you this over too. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
That's me, I mean, I can go less.
Yeah.
And then punch them all, go for it. Was low. Yeah.
Oh, is that, I'll be there Wednesday, so, for the next 10 days.
Madam President, I move that we go into session for 45 minutes to discuss an individual employee's performance pursuant to non-elected personnel, exception under coma, beginning at 9:35, and the open meeting will resume in the board meeting 45 minutes after that, because I'm a lawyer and I don't do math. Never think of that when I was a- You're not a lawyer.
What you mean to say 9:35?